All right, how's everybody doing? My name is Todd Richards,
And I'm Darko Vukovic.
and we are with the County Freedom Coalition. And this podcast, we are interviewing people who are trying to advance liberty and freedom in the state of Colorado. And today we are joined by Heidi Ganahl. Thank you very much for, I would assume, taking out a little chunk of time for your very, very busy schedule that you have going on there.
Well, it's okay. I'm so honored and blessed to be here. And it's snowing like crazy right now. So it's good to be all snuggled up inside doing this.
So I guess usually one of the things that we usually ask people is, why now?
Wow. Well, our country's a mess, our state's a mess. I'm a problem solver. I've been very blessed to live the American dream and build my business and sell my business. And I've been an elected regent for 6 years now, started several nonprofits. So I've checked a lot of boxes on things I wanted to accomplish. And the next big thing I need to do is to protect the American dream for our kids and my future grandkids so they can have the same opportunities that I did. And I didn't want to wake up in 5 or 10 years and think I could have done something and didn't. So I threw my hat in the ring, and it's been quite an adventure, but I've had a wonderful time and met amazing people and gotten to travel the state. So I just feel honored to be on the front lines and be a voice for all of Colorado.
Very good. Very good. Yeah, that's how did that discussion go with the family on, was that a tough one to bring up, or was it an easy one was a no-brainer?
Well, it was fine until I'd been thinking about it. In 2020, I was starting to think about it, and I got diagnosed with a brain tumor. And it wasn't cancerous, but I had to have brain surgery. It was pretty serious. And so, of course, my family was very protective and wanted me to heal up and stay quiet, stay calm. But I had to heal up during the election of 2020 in the fall. I had to sit on the couch and be calm. And that was not a time to be calm.
No.
So I got pretty fired up. So a few months after that, they said, well, you're obviously not going to run for governor. I said, actually, when they took out that tumor, they took out my filter. I'm super feisty. I'm ready to go. And that was the end of that.
That's good. It's yeah, that's a big decision. So glad that you made it. So Darko, you have a question? I know you do.
Well, I'm interested. I noticed you said the country's a mess, the state's a mess, but your demeanor, your language, your body language, everything is very optimistic and very positive. So how do you reconcile those two? And what would be your message to people who maybe let those things weigh them down?
Well, it is a dark time for Colorado and for our country, for our kids. But I have hope because I've learned so much about the policy issues and listened to experts about the different challenges we're facing. And I've listened to the people of Colorado, and I have a pretty good handle on how to fix a lot of these things. So whether it's crime or the cost of living or our kids' challenges that they're facing in school or the farmers and ranchers, the energy industry, I've got a pretty good plan on how to tackle the issues that are at hand, and I'm excited to roll up my sleeves and get to work.
Oh, that's awesome. And I definitely, one thing I noticed about your platform that was kind of unique is that you have freedom, the economy, and the cost of living kind of intertwined as part of one section of your site. I'm curious, how do you see freedom being related to economics?
I think it's very tied, because if I'm a small business owner and I'm getting regulated like crazy and paying taxes and fees and having new social programs put on me that I can't afford, I'm not going to stay in business. It's not going to be worth it. I'm not going to be able to make it. And part of freedom is having opportunity and having a good job and creating jobs and giving people self-worth and hope and inspiration that they can do something they love and they're passionate about. That's one of the things I loved about franchising. Was I was the franchisor, and I got to help lots of franchisees start their own business and live their own American dream. So I see it very tied together. I think the way that we bring more economic opportunity is more freedom, and not regulating, taxing, feeing people, telling them how to run their business, their lives, lives. And I just miss that way of life here in Colorado. It doesn't exist right now. It's just the government is so onerous. There's so much regulation, red tape, and mandates on us right now.
And would it be fair to say that a lot of that comes from federal, a lot of that comes from state? Who's the real culprit? Is it a team effort, or do you feel like there's a little bit more or less blame to be assigned at different levels of government?
Well, I know that the federal government is just out of control right now, but I need to focus on what I can do. And as governor, there's a lot I can do. I can take us to zero income tax over 8 years, which will skinny down the size of government and put more money back into the people of Colorado's pockets. And I'm not going to scrap programs or services or, add more taxes in other places. We can do this over 8 years because the government and the spending is out of control. So we need to put a limit on that and get it back in its proper place. And then on schools, we need to free up school choice so that parents can make different options if they need to. And on crime, we can't have a productive society. You can't own a successful small business. Your kids aren't going to be doing well if crime is all over the place, if our auto's getting stolen, if fentanyl's, killing our children in our community. So we need a law and order governor who will be tough on drug dealers, empathetic when someone has addiction issues, give solutions there, but also make sure that our streets are safe.
Yeah, and one thing I noticed on your platform, which really I was happy to see, was that you don't just talk about cutting taxes, but you actually talk about cutting government, because the government is the true cost. And so I've seen situations where I believe Kansas was an example, and even more in international news. I think the UK just announced that they were going to cut taxes and had to about pace. So I think the two have to kind of come hand in hand. So I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on that. And I'd also love to hear, I noticed on your site, you said you wanted to cut 10% of the government spending the first year. Any particular approach you would take in determining what that should be? And do you have a list of where you'd like to start cutting?
Yes. So the most important thing we can do is give power, control, and money back to the people of Colorado. And so the idea is to first roll back the damage that Jared Polis has done. So he has grown the size of government by almost 25% in little under 4 years. He's also added 85 new taxes and fees. He's added 4,000 new full-time employees into our state government. We're one of the largest employers in the state. That's ridiculous. So what I'm mostly going to do is undo a lot of what he's put in place and gently roll things back so that we can at least get a handle on things in the first year or two. And then we'll more assertively look at cutting spending where there's waste, there's fraud, there's Polish pork, I call it, there's special tax exemptions. We're going to move fees to taxes, which is what they are, but we can't control them if they're fees. They're like, not under the Tabor cap. So there's so much we can do to rein in spending and growth of government. And right now we have almost a $40 billion budget. The budget has doubled in the last decade. And we do not have double the support from the government right now. That's for sure.
Yeah. And if I try to put myself kind of in the shoes of the average voter, I think if somebody says, hey, I'm interested in cutting government, my first thought goes to maybe the government services that I actually like. So I'm sitting here going, oh no, not my state parks. I love to go hiking. Like, what's your assurance to the average Coloradan that there is actually, waste or just overburdened, or times when government's involved where if the government just stepped back, the free market would do just fine without it? How do you communicate that message without having them be scared of the idea of losing maybe the few parts of government that they actually like?
Well, I start by asking people, what do you think government does well? And wait and see what they say so I can get a better understanding of what their concerns are or what they're afraid of me cutting. And second, I like to talk about the spirit of our country and the intent of what the government's role was supposed to be. It's fine to give people a hand up. It's not supposed to be a hand out. and it's supposed to incent proper growth and development. It's not supposed to regulate the heck out of it. Like, as an example, affordable housing is a huge problem in Colorado. Well, the Home Builders Association told me that 1/4 of the cost of new housing is regulatory. It's just gotten out of control. And now we add all these new green energy regulations, and all of a sudden people can't afford to buy a home and developers can't afford to build. Then you layer that on with all the regulations preventing us from storing water in the state. And then there's not enough water to go on. So it's these layers of regulation that suffocate proper growth and suffocate the free market. We don't have a free market right now. So it's educating people about the proper role of government, educating people on how much better it will be if you let the free market do its thing and put more money back into their pocket. It's a little scary for some people, but it's the best thing for our long-term outcomes in our country and in Colorado.
Yeah, and one thing that I believe Rachel Stovall is the first one that brought it up to us. I'm not sure if you're familiar with her down in Colorado
I love
Springs.
Rachel.
Yeah, so we had her on the show, and she calls these the feel-good policies, right? And affordable housing is one of them. It's like, oh, we're going to make housing affordable. And what that really means is we're going to take your tax dollars and pay for somebody else's housing, right? And so I'd be curious, what's your solution to how we can really drive, I don't know that we can drive down the cost of housing, but we can at least remove the portions of the equation that drive it up. Mm-hmm. Any thoughts on how you as governor and as part of the state government, you guys could improve that?
Yes, absolutely. So we can ease up on the green energy requirements for building. Right now, they're trying to create a statewide building code. So the little 70 and 80-year-old couples in La Junta, Colorado, if they want to remodel their house or change something, all of a sudden they have to do it according to these onerous codes, which I get there's good intent, but all of a sudden they can't afford it because it's way too far, too fast for this little house in La Junta, Colorado. That's one of the fears. We can also look at innovative new ways of providing housing. So co-housing, community housing, tiny houses, modular. There's all kinds of new ways to do that. Finally, there are also ways to redevelop old malls or old retail sites where we can create new cool housing projects. But you've got to make it feasible for developers to do that and let the free market do its thing. And then also give people an opportunity to have that spark of homeownership. I think homeownership is one of the most important ways to create wealth and to create incentives for people to live the American dream and do better. So I have a different approach to it than, say, just handing out, checks to people. I don't think that's the right approach. But I do believe that homeownership is one of the most important things that we can see get back on track in our country and in our state.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, it's always, I think the most challenging thing is to have to go against these policies that have a good intent and sound really good. Like, wouldn't you want a very clean house? Wouldn't you want an energy efficient house? It's like, we all want these things, but and this is something that Thomas Sowell always talks about. I don't know if you're familiar with him. Yeah. He's an economist, one of my favorite. And he always talks about what's like, well, the pricing mechanism is what's supposed to allow you to understand if that's a good decision or not. And so then when the government gets involved and eliminates the pricing mechanism and only gives you one side of the equation, by the end of it, you're like, I can't afford a house, but it's hard to associate it back to all those things that went into that house becoming unaffordable, again, paved with good intentions.
Yeah, and we're seeing that with the Marshall fire victims up in Superior, where I actually used to live up until 3 years ago. And many of my friends lost their homes. And the insurance is not covering the cost of the rebuild because the new green energy requirements are so onerous. And B, they've lost their will to rebuild because it's so complicated. There's so much red tape. It's not fun, to think of getting through another year after all the difficulties they've been trying to traverse the regulatory jungle that is building a home up in Boulder County now.
Wow. So another thing you mentioned is the reservoirs and water, and we keep hearing we're in a drought, and we hear climate change, and we hear all these things, and California is having wildfires and water shortages. But one thing that's interesting is, I don't know if you're familiar with this case study, but San Diego County had actually been investing in water reservoirs and storage capacity, and they were the one county that had no water shortage problems in the whole state. So I love to hear that. And I was really disappointed to hear Governor Polis say that that's unrealistic when we have so much abundance of water, and it's really the infrastructure that's aging that we're relying on. Any thoughts on what you could do as a governor to help us with the water situation?
Yeah, again, this is a solvable problem, but Polis likes to defer to the federal government and kind of play nice, play footsie with the states around us that they could do better. I mean, California could do desalinization. There's lots of ways that they could get better access to water instead of taking ours. And we're letting a lot of our water flow right out of the state right now. And so these storage projects have been in play for 20 years, some of them. And I get that we want to protect the environment and the species, but at the same time, our state is drying up because we're being short-sighted about it. So I would be a governor that has a very strong spine and stand up to the federal government and say what's rightly ours is ours and get those storage projects through. And then I would also do everything we could to hold on to what we have in the Colorado River Compact. They're trying to renegotiate it. It's not good for Colorado if we do. So I'll hold firm on that. And just again, conservation is fine. Actually, Colorado farmers and ranchers are some of the leaders in conservation. They've done amazing things here, but that's not going to solve the problem. We've got to store, baby, store.
Yeah, and one added benefit that didn't get brought up was that you can also put dams, and then that gives you a source of clean energy. And I'm surprised that
that's a great point.
Yeah, I'm surprised that Governor Polis doesn't at least see that benefit of it, even if he thinks the overall picture is maybe unadvantageous. I'd love to switch to safety, but Todd, any questions you'd like to throw in there?
No, I know you had questions, so.
Sorry, Heidi, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, one of the things that's so fascinating about running for governor is you learn about all these different issues. I mean, facing the state, whether it's homelessness or mental illness or our schools, the roads, the water, the farming, the ranching, the energy industry, it's just an amazing place Colorado is, but it does have a very complex collection of issues. And you need someone that knows how to collaborate, that has a heart for our state, that isn't have their eye on something else outside of Colorado, that's really committed to the long-term success of our state, because some very short-sighted things have been done here that have caused some problems, like whether it's the good intention of keeping people out of jail for doing drugs. Well, that's one thing, but then you're seeing the effects of it in the streets and with our children. We have the 5th highest drug addiction rate in the country for kids here. And Polis made a conscious decision not to put a cap on high potency marijuana. And that's something we don't talk a lot about, that I'm finding is really one of the roots of a lot of the problems that we have. Also, he made a decision to to allow us to be a sanctuary state after saying he wouldn't in the debates. Well, that means that ICE and law enforcement can't coordinate to stop trafficking and the flow of fentanyl into Colorado, which has consequences. So all these decisions, whether they were well-intentioned or not, have negative consequences in a lot of cases, and they're overwhelming our state when you put them all together. So it's going to be chipping away at each one of these decisions, rolling back a lot of them, and doing what's right for the long-term safety and success of Colorado, not for a short-term political gain.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned fentanyl and you mentioned sanctuary state. How are the two issues related?
Yeah, so what happens is when he declares us a sanctuary state, that means that ICE and like border control and law enforcement can't coordinate. They can't really help each other. Like if law enforcement puts a drug dealer in jail and he knows that they're here illegally or they've come here to just traffic, he can't like report it to ICE, and get cooperation. It's very complicated, and it's a myriad of federal and state issues. But we've got to give law enforcement the tools and resources to stop the flow of drugs and trafficking into Colorado. I-25 is one of the main corridors, and so is I-70. So that's really complicated. The other thing that happened is when they decriminalized fentanyl, now it's a misdemeanor if it's under 1 gram, and that was changed last year, but that can still kill 500 people. And so if they were even putting drug dealers in jail who had more than that, I could give a little bit of grace, but that's not happening right now. So we're letting drug dealers stay out of jail. There's not much of accountability for them if they make bad decisions or inadvertently kill somebody. And then you've got the access to Colorado through I-25 from the southern border of the US. So it's just this perfect storm. And now we have the second highest increase in fentanyl deaths in the country because of it. And kids are dying because they'll take a Xanax or an Adderall and it's laced with fentanyl and they're poisoned and they die. It's terrible. It's just a terrible, terrible thing we're dealing with here in this state right now.
Yeah, it's I mean, gosh, and I know he's a big proponent of, I forget what the exact name is, but the testing kits where you can test the drugs for fentanyl. And it's like, there's a part of me that's sympathetic to that because, you know, if you're already going to take it, then being at least able to, you know, understand what you're taking is good. But on the flip side, if you feel comfortable taking it, the chances that you're willing to take it also goes up. And are you always going to have the test kits, and are you always going to have the diligence to do so? So it's like, it's a tricky problem. I'd love to hear your thoughts on, you know, the more nuanced view there and how it all unravels.
Well, you know, I'm a mom of 4. I've run several nonprofits. I have so much compassion for people in our state that are struggling with drug addiction and mental illness. But at the end of the day, putting fentanyl into our market is not good for anybody. And so what we need to do is go to the source, which is the trafficking that comes across our southern border of Colorado and, you know, people who are dealing it. And so we've got to put very, very tough with them. Now, if you're a kid who, you know, gets addicted or has some issues, or you're on the streets, you're homeless and you're dealing with it and you need help, then we've got to fix the mental health system so you can get the help you need. Because right now it's broken in a big way. So I like the idea of care courts. I've been studying Michael Schellenberger's approach, who wrote San Francisco. I think he has a lot of good ideas. But here's the thing: if we create care courts and we have judges who are trained in how to deal with addiction, mental health, crime, and someone comes to them and they need to go to jail because they've committed crimes, but they also need help for addiction, the jails can't deal with that right now. They don't have the resources to do it. Okay, so we're going to send them to a rehab facility. There aren't enough rehab facilities. There aren't enough beds to help them. And some people just don't want help. So they're not going to stay in the rehab facility. So do you let them live on the streets? Well, there's nothing compassionate about that. So, you know, it's a little bit of tough love and a lot of compassion, but we've got to take a different approach. What's happening right now, we're spending ridiculous amounts of money, and the problem has gotten a third worse in the last couple of years.
Gosh, yeah. And if I'm hearing you correctly, like maybe this is one of those areas where government could reduce its expenses, because there's like what you see, and then there's what really happens behind the scenes. So I'll give you an example. Like somebody who's struggling with drug addiction who ends up taking too much and is laying unconscious on the street. Well, now you have an ambulance call, you have paramedics, you have firefighters, you have to take them to a hospital, you got to engage the doctors. So all that cost does not get reflected in the true cost of having this problem. It just kind of gets dissipated across many different agencies and many different institutions that have to absorb the impact of that person. Because I think the classic argument is, well, you know, if you put them in jail, you're going to spend $80,000, or I forget the exact number, so don't quote me on that, but you're going to spend a high amount of money dealing with this person. But what's omitted is, what's that true cost of having this person living on the streets and you know, incurring the damage to society that's happening.
Yeah. And what about the small businesses in downtown Denver who are shutting down because they can't do, no one wants to come down there because there's tents everywhere. There's needles on the street. There's people pooping on the side. I mean, it's ridiculous. And that is not the right way to support our small business owners who have invested their life into these businesses. And then there's people who own property in downtown Denver who can't sell their property because of the issues that are happening down there. So it's not fair to the people who are just trying to live their lives and raise their families. And I get that we want to take care of the people with addiction and mental health issues, but It can't be at the cost of our society and our livelihood in downtown Denver. We can do both. We can take care of the problem, but we can also take care of the people who own businesses and live in those areas.
Yeah, that's a wonderful example of the hidden cost, right? Like the loss in sales tax, the loss in income tax, the loss in property values and property taxes. So all of that destruction comes in.
And to your point, the cost of, first responders and the cost of, traffic being shut down for, 5 hours because something happened. Or crime because someone was stealing money to buy drugs. That's a lot of the root of the crime increase here in Colorado.
Absolutely. You also mentioned restoring truth in sentencing. Can you elaborate on that?
So right now, the parole board that was appointed by Jared Polis is very, very lenient. They believe in, emptying the prisons somewhat, and that jail or prison isn't the right answer. And so the consequence of that is a lot of criminals who are sentenced to 10 years, 5 years, are getting just a portion of their sentence. So they get out very quickly, and they know that. And if criminals know that, it removes the incentive to do the right thing. And so we've got to be tough on crime. If someone is sentenced to 10 years, you don't let them out in 10 months. And also personal recognizance bonds. So the idea that you can let somebody out on a bond where there's no cash involved and expect them to show up again is pretty silly. Like, that's pretty silly to think that that's going to work, and it's not working at all.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I have a personal case. My neighbor's house was burglarized by somebody who was let out 2 months earlier for prior burglary. And I don't think they served more than 2 months in the situation before.
Well, one of the consequences is we have the 4th highest recidivism rate in the country here, which means most of the crime is by repeat offenders. So this, how the police chiefs have explained it to me, is there's a small group of people who are doing the majority of the crime. And we just keep letting them out, letting them get away with it. And until we stop that cycle, it's going to get worse and worse because more and more criminals are going to pick up on that.
Absolutely. So kind of shifting into family and education, you also talk about wanting to hold college and universities accountable. I'd love to hear your thoughts on how you do that, especially as a regent of CU Boulder. But also I'd love to ask you, is there a reason you didn't include K through 12? And is there an opportunity to improve the accountability at that level as well?
Oh, heck yeah. All of the above. Right now, administrators are growing at a tremendous rate. I believe since the year 2000, the number of administrators in K through 12 has grown 132%, and the number of students has grown about 26%. Same thing's happening in higher education. The money's getting pulled out of the classroom, away from the teachers, and used to basically hire more bureaucrats. That is not how we solve the education crisis we're in right now. The money needs to go into the classroom. We need to pay teachers more. We need to, stop depending on administrators to make the decisions. Let teachers decide how to teach, and then give power back to parents in K through 12 so that if our kids are not learning what they need to, they can have those dollars to make different choices. So the funding should follow the student, not the system.
And what's your thought, or what's your message to Coloradans who maybe are already so busy just trying to provide for their family? They've got their kids in public school. And so then comes this message of, oh, now you can take your kid and you can go wherever you want. And their concern is that it's not just about the money, but it's also the amount of time and knowledge I have to invest. And right now I'm just trying to provide for my family. How do you balance that concern that maybe the public schools will just deteriorate and get worse if people start pulling their kids out aggressively from them?
Well, how much worse can they get when 60% of our kids can't read, write, or do math at grade level? And in Denver public schools, 95% of African-American and Hispanic kids cannot read at grade level. It can't get much worse than that. So we've got to do something differently. And choice, transparency, and competition is how it's worked well in other states like Arizona and Florida, some other southern states that have implemented full school choice. And I truly believe it will be better for the public schools if they have fewer students to focus on, smaller class sizes, and they pay teachers more. Because right now in the public school system, the average classroom gets about $250,000 in funding. Only $50,000 of that goes to the teacher. That's ridiculous. it goes back again to the administrators. So I think there will be a lot more opportunities for teachers also if we go all in on school choice, because parents are catching on to micro schools or pandemic pods, if you've heard them called. So 10 families might get together and hire a teacher to teach 20 kids in those 10 families, and they pay them very well. Or they might start a new charter school. They might start a new private school. They might be able to afford to go to the Catholic school down the block, whatever works best for those children. I'm more worried about the children getting a good education than the survival of an archaic system that isn't working for our kids.
So for those parents where that message is potentially scary of, oh my gosh, there's going to be this added burden in having to maneuver this landscape, do you see any opportunity for this program to help with guidance and advice and helping those parents understand what options are available to them and how they could go about utilizing some of those new options?
Sure. And, most of it is kind of the free market doing its thing. You'll notice that a lot of the parent groups now, a lot of mom groups on the internet, like Facebook, et cetera, Instagram, et cetera, Nextdoor, they are a buzz. Like they chatter about what's working, what's not, which schools they love, which places are their kids thriving. I mean, it's not, I think just letting word of mouth do its thing and letting parents support each other and be active and engaged. And also, I mean, we can absolutely create in certain communities opportunities to share, what's happening in the schools, how their scores are going, what they specialize in, especially for kids with learning disabilities. This is kind of what got me interested in this whole school choice movement. Was 2 of my 4 kids have learning disabilities. So one has dyslexia, one has dysgraphia, and we could not get the help we needed in the public school system. And I'm, pretty involved in schools, and I'm a regent, and I still couldn't get the help. So I was thinking, how do moms that are overwhelmed or dads that are working 3 jobs trying to figure out how to make it, how do they figure this out? So we've got to do something differently. And I think transparency in curriculum so that parents are more involved in understanding what's happening in the classroom, and then choice, and then competition is what's going to heal our education system.
Great. And lastly, let's just switch to rural Colorado, if you don't mind. Todd, did you have a question you wanted to ask?
Oh, no, it's about time to go.
Yep, I know we have. If you could spare 2 more minutes, Heidi, would that be okay?
Yeah,
please. Yes. So with rural Colorado, I noticed one of the things you mentioned as your highest priority is to better manage our forests. There was a study by a top university, it slips my mind at the moment, but California's wildfire season just this last year offset the last 20 years in savings for CO2 emissions that the state has accomplished. So so it's not just destruction of property and the destruction to the nature, but it's also a major issue if you subscribe to the pollution element. And I think forest fires are much worse than just carbon dioxide. How do you go about wildfire management, and is there maybe an opportunity for a private-public partnership with organizations like ski resorts and other entities that operate in these areas to help us out with it?
Absolutely. So from speaking with the experts in Colorado right now, 1/4 of our standing trees are dead. That is very, very dangerous. And so there's, again, the environmental approach has gone too far, too fast. We've got to clean up our forests. I do believe a lot of folks in the community, in the local municipalities, in business, like to your point, the ski resorts are very interested in tackling this issue. It's just been devastating to watch these fires. So absolutely, we can clean up the forest more assertively and make sure that we have resources for when there are fires. We do not have enough fire equipment here in Colorado. We do not have we're not doing defensive or prescribed burns. We're not building defensible space. There are some very intentional things we can do to stop fires when they start. So I've got some great people helping me on a lot of these issues. I actually have about 16 different advisory committees on all these different topics, and we'll have plans day one ready to go on how to adjust the budget, how to adjust our resources, and how to go after these problems hard. That's what I do. I'm a problem solver.
Yeah, it blew my mind when I believe it was Obama who banned wood fire heating devices for houses. And so if you think about it, that just killed the whole market for firewood. And what is firewood? It's all that dead wood that somebody can actually make a living collecting and burning slowly rather than burning at once. Heidi, thank you so much for your time today. I really enjoyed this interview.
Well, of course, I'm so honored to be here. And hopefully next time I'm on, I will be the next governor of Colorado.
Yes, we can't wait to have you on again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yep. It's there somewhere.